Welcome to Start Here, a very special mini-series within Sugar Mama's Fire Play that is designed just for you. This is your safe space where you can ask me your questions. You can share your financial challenges, and hopefully together we can break through any fears or mental blocks holding you back from getting started. So whether you're feeling overwhelmed, stuck, or simply unsure of where to begin and start working on your goals and dreams, this is the perfect series for you, where I'm going to provide you with honest, practical, and empowering guidance to help you take the first steps towards achieving financial clarity and confidence in your life. Here's how it works. Simply send me a DM on Instagram at SugarMamaTV or my own personal lifestyle account, Canna Campbell Official. Introduce yourself and let me know what you need general advice on. Now, in each episode of Start Here, I'm going to inspire you. I'm going to educate you around money and what you need to be thinking about and considering. And I'm going to empower you to start thinking critically, take the right action, and start moving in the correct direction today in positive alignment to those exciting financial goals and dreams. So let's get started with today's episode. So today's question comes in, and I'm going to call this lady Amanda just to protect her privacy. And this is what she's written. Hi, Canna. I appreciate all that you do. I have a question for your new series Start Here. I'm trying to choose between adding extra money to my superannuation account or paying down more off my interest-free $200,000 home loan that I have with my dad. I have this interest-free loan for another 5 years. I'm 50 this year and I have another $260,000 in super. I'm currently contributing around 15% in super, including employer contributions. In 5 years' time, I have to get a mortgage to pay back my dad. I'd like to transition to retirement at age 60, then maybe find a part-time job working for as long as required. Can you please outline the benefits of adding extra money to superannuation as opposed to paying off the interest-free loan? Love, Amanda. Okay, all right, there's a lot of things going on here, and of course I need to remind everyone that whilst I'm going to give you lots of ideas and things to think about, none of this is actually personal advice, so please bear that in mind, even though I am a licensed financial planner. So, all right, what we're going to start off with is going through some important assumptions for some of my answers today. I'm going to assume that this $250,000 loan is the only loan that you have. You don't have any credit card debt, buy now, pay later, payments going on, car loans and stuff like that. I'm also going to assume that in 5 years' time, the whole entire loan must be repaid to your dad. I'm also going to assume that you have plenty of emergency money. I'm going to assume that you have adequate personal insurance in place, like income protection and TPD and trauma, for example. And I'm also going to assume that you don't have any investments that really, other than, your superannuation really is your only investment. You don't have any shares or investment properties, outside of your asset base. I'm also going to assume a couple of things around your goals. So please, bear this in mind. I'm going to assume that you would ideally, in a perfect world, you'd love to be mortgage free. And I'm going to assume that you want to have the choice to be able to decide when you retire, exactly at what age. I know you've mentioned 60, but is it, how close and adamant are you about age 60? And I also am going to assume that you want to have a comfortable retirement. I should point out though, I do not know what your risk profile is. I have no idea how much money you earn. I have no idea what your cash flow looks like, whether you're sticking to your budget comfortably or whether things are quite tight. And I have no idea as to how much money you really want to retire on, as well as, the caps that you maybe have reached for previous superannuation contributions. So please bear in mind that I'm going to give you some great things to think about and to potentially do or get advice around doing, but you need to be aware of the limitations of this conversation. But I promise you're going to have a lot of things to think about from listening to this. So from reading your message, it sounds like you think it's one or the other. You either put more money towards paying off this loan to your father, which is interest-free, or whether you put more money into superannuation. From your point of view, it looks like you just think there's two options, one or the other. This is why I love what I do, because I look at things in such a different way. To me, there's actually 4 different options. There's the option, as you said, to put more money towards savings and pay back your dad. The other option is to put money into super. There's actually the option of doing a mix of the both. And then, of course, there is the option to start investing outside of super. Now, I'm going to come back to all of these towards the end of this episode, but please know it's not, a black and white world. There are lots of different things. And the mix of grey that we may come up with and think about taking can actually sometimes be darker, sometimes be lighter, because we always tweak and change an investment strategy or a wealth creation strategy as we naturally go through life and go through all those different stages and the evolution. You need to change your strategy along the way. So it's never sort of this way or that way and that's it and you've got to stick to it, it's set in stone. Never. So, all right, what I want to do is give you some really clear steps as to how to get started, because this is the big thing here. First of all, I want you to get crystal clear about what you really want. Money loves definition and detail. I want you to spend time doing this. Don't rush it. Think about it clearly, maybe cross-reference your budget and your living expenses, perhaps talk to friends about how much they think they want to retire on or how they've worked it out. And of course, I'm going to flag the whole way through this that you go and get personal advice from a licensed financial planner. But these are things you can do in the meantime before you see a financial planner, so that when you do turn up to the financial planner's office, you are armed with so much information and you are so knowledgeable. And, your financial planner will look at you and go, wow, you already have done a lot of homework. You really know what you want. This is going to be great. I can really help you. We can waste no time at all and hit the ground running. So as I said, I want you to think about these questions. Number one is, how much do you want to retire on? Now, this is really important. There's almost two answers to this, because you're going to have to think about, okay, how much do you want to retire on working part-time? How much do you want to retire on being in full-time retirement? And if you're working part-time, how much do you think you can realistically earn? And what type of work would you be looking at working part-time? The other question you need to think about is, how long do you want this money to last? Now, I know this sounds like a really morbid question. It's quite a sobering one, but you need to look at what the life expectancy is like and think about your own health and, think about whether you have children or grandchildren or loved ones or a charity that you want to leave money to. And of course, are you in good health? What your lifestyle going to look like during retirement? Are you going to need lump sums perhaps for maintenance of your home? Or are you going to need lump sums to help donate money to charity? Or are you going to need lump sums to perhaps make some major lifestyle changes or go on long sabbaticals and long wonderful retirements? You really need to get crystal clear about what you really want, so that when we understand what we want, we can then see how much that's going to cost, and then we can work back from here. And this is what I do with all of my financial planning clients. We would actually look at, okay, well, where do we want to land? Okay, that's the ideal situation. If I could wave a magic wand, that's what age you want to retire on, and that's how much you want to earn. Therefore, we can now calculate how much we need, and that's exactly what you're going to need. Now, obviously, I don't know too much about your situation, so I'm going to use some really rough numbers here. But if you want to retire on, say, $60,000 per annum, in today's dollars, and you want that money to last, say, 30 years, and I'm going to assume, no lump sums, and you don't need to leave any money in your estate. You're happy to watch that money, in your superannuation erode away over 30 years down to nothing. You're going to need approximately $1 million. And obviously that's going to be subject to return. Knowing that figure of, say, $1 million is going to help you get really clear as to what is involved from you. What action needs to be taken today and what you need to be doing right now to get started. Because with that $1 million, having that figure, that's your landing destination. You can then look at, okay, well, what have I got so far? You can jump on the Sugar Mama website and there's lots of calculators out there as well as the Sugar Mama ones. But you can start to run some projections. So for example, you mentioned in your message to me that you have about $260,000 in super and that you're salary sacrificing, 15% per annum. You can now plug those numbers in and run those projections to see what that will look like in 10 years' time. And you might run your numbers and go, oh, wow, I'm actually going to have about $850,000 in super at age 60, but I actually really need $1 million or I need $1.2 million. You can then see the gap. And the sooner you see the gap, the better, because it means you've got more time to try and bridge that gap. And yes, bridging that gap is possible when you actually start putting the right strategy in place under the guidance of a financial planner giving you personal advice on an ongoing basis. All right, just to quickly recap. Number one is getting crystal clear about what you want. Where do you want to land? How much you want to retire on? Exactly at what age? What's that transition going to look like? How much money you're going to earn part-time? What's your lifestyle? What lump sum expenses are you going to need? And how long is that money going to last? Step number two is to then look at projections. Look at what you've got so far and use a superannuation calculator to see how much money you will have at age 60, continuing on with what you're currently doing. That will then allow you to see the gap. The next step, step 3, I recommend that you have an honest conversation with your father. Have a conversation with him about the loan and be really open about your goals and let him know that it is your number one priority to make sure that he has that money back in his hand in full. But I also want to play devil's advocate here. I want you to ask him about this money, because we don't want this loan to you to ever jeopardize his own financial well-being and his own financial goals. So making sure that there is complete transparency, honesty, and have that open, safe communication that is always respectful between you two, I think is extremely important, because it works both ways. And of course, you would never want your father to be, suffering financially as he waits for that money to come back. And also, you never know what conversations may actually come from having this initial conversation in the first place. Next step is, I want you to go and see a financial planner. Yes, I said I'm going to help you get started, and this information that I've just given you, these instructions, are going to really help make a big difference in the quality and efficiency of a financial planner. The financial planner will sit down with you and will actually work out the different options. As I said, I actually see 4 options here. Saving, that is putting the money aside to pay back your father. The second option is to put all that money into superannuation. Third option is to do a little bit of a mix of both. You have a repayment plan in place to your dad. You also do some salary sacrificing along the way, or maybe some after-tax contributions. And then obviously number 4 is to start building an investment portfolio outside of super. Now, I'm actually going to park idea number 4 today, because I feel like the first 3 are probably the most important and relevant ones to you right now. So let's break down all the pros and cons for each one of them. So the first option you mentioned is saving up this money. So any extra money that you have, putting aside. And with the idea of putting it aside into, say, an online savings account where it can earn some interest and, help build up that money so that when it comes to, that 5-year term and you need to pay that money back to your dad, you've hopefully got a decent amount saved that you can transfer to him. And hopefully you take out a much smaller mortgage, because I know you've mentioned taking out a mortgage of $250,000 in 5 years. Ideally, as you're approaching retirement, it's not great. Sometimes it's unavoidable, but ideally, from a financial planning point of view, you don't want to enter retirement or be approaching retirement still with a mortgage around your neck. So this idea would be, having ideally like a separate savings account, putting money into it on a regular basis. And even if you can save, say, $10,000 per year over the next 5 years, it means that you're not going to be taking out a $250,000 home loan to pay back your dad. You're taking out a $200,000 home loan because you've saved up $50,000 and you need to borrow $50,000. And of course, this avoids, going into retirement with a mortgage. There's a big difference between a $250,000 mortgage versus a $200,000 mortgage. It also means that being a smaller mortgage, it's much easier to pay that mortgage off. And it also means that you're going to have a smaller gap when it comes to retirement with your mortgage. Now, I should also point out the true cost of a mortgage is expensive. No one really talks about this, but I ran some really rough numbers for you. And a $250,000 mortgage at an average interest rate of 6% over 20 years is actually going to cost you $183,000 in interest over that period of time. However, a $200,000 mortgage using the same numbers is actually going to cost you $147,000 in interest. So this gives you a really good perspective as to the true cost of a mortgage, and really helps motivate you to try and have a smallest mortgage as possible. So yes, you are right. Putting your savings aside into a separate savings account, ideally an online savings account where you can get some interest or decent interest, is going to obviously add an important element to your long-term financial security. And I should point out, but when you have, a savings account, obviously you've got that to, if something goes wrong and you don't have enough emergency money to rely on. Now, the downside of this is the opportunity cost. Because you're putting all your money into the savings account in lieu of the upcoming new mortgage, it means that you are not going to have as much money in super, which may mean that you have to delay your retirement or work harder or be, even more strict perhaps with your budget. It also means that, there's the opportunity cost that the money isn't actually invested. It's sitting in an online savings account, whereas if the money was in super, it's, as you know, it's properly invested. Also, I should point out from the psychological point of view, it's not as exciting, paying down debt when it comes to investing. And there are also a different tax situation between savings, because that savings, the interest you earn on your savings is taxable, whereas the money that you earn from that money being in your superannuation is still taxable, but it's taxed at a much lower rate. And the tax payable comes out of your super, not out of your direct pocket. There's also, the downside of having a separate savings account to save up this money is there's temptation still there. You could, one day wake up and decide to go and blow it on a fabulous, luxurious holiday. That is a realistic temptation for some people. And there also is the risk, and this is the biggest one of all, which you can clearly see, I can tell from your message to me, is you may not actually have enough to be able to retire on. And that could also create a lot of stress, knowing that, and me leaving you panicking today. However, of course, there are lots of things you can do to try and avoid that, by getting good quality advice. So this is obviously very top line. There are a lot more things to consider, and I could probably sit and talk to you for about 5 hours about this, but we'll try and keep this episode under about 22 minutes if possible. So that's the pros and cons of building up some savings in lieu of paying your dad back. The second option, as you mentioned, is where you put more money into superannuation. Now, I want to say this. A lot of people assume that their superannuation is taken care of through their employer contributions, and they don't need to worry about doing anything else because, their employer's paying about to be 12% per annum in SG contributions. However, the cold, hard reality is for most of us, superannuation is not going to be enough for us to be able to retire on the lifestyle that we desire. So I want to take a moment to commend you for actually being so aware of this and actually taking action by already, from what it looks like, salary sacrificing up to 15% per annum. So that is actually amazing. Good on you. Keep going. That's brilliant. And obviously, the more money we have in superannuation, the more comfortable and secure and harmonious our retirement is going to be. And of course, when we pay attention to our super, we make sure it's properly invested. We have those wonderful compounding effects working over the long run. As I said, your superannuation is not a savings account, it is an investment where your money is working for you. There's also the wonderful tax benefits, which I touched on a second ago with superannuation, where there's a 15% tax rate on the income and between 10 to 15 on capital gain, depending on how long you've held the assets. And if your superannuation is in Australian industrial shares, you might be able to access those really sexy franking credits that can pretty much wipe out some of the tax for you. And, the more money you have in super, the earlier, the better, because that compounding interest is just absolutely phenomenal and powerful in creating that financial independence for yourself. Now, the downside of having more money into superannuation is that money, as we all know, it's stuck. We cannot access it until we meet a condition of release, which for most of us is going to be around about age 60. And of course, yes, the laws and the regulations could definitely change. The other downside is you could be facing retirement still with a mortgage. A $250,000 mortgage potentially, or hopefully you've made some inroads before you retire. But as I said, it's not ideal. It's always to be avoided, retiring with a mortgage. The other risk is that the investments, that is the investments within your superannuation, perform badly. They don't reach your expectations. You get, invested, it's not properly diversified, or it's, it's perhaps invested too conservatively. This is why you need a really good financial planner, because they'll obviously help reduce those risks as much as they possibly can. As I said, the rules may change. The level of contributions may change. They may decrease the cap, so you can't actually salary sacrifice as much as the 15% that you mentioned. And I don't know what your income is, so I can't actually give you any sort of general advice around that. And of course, they may reduce or change the rules when it comes to accessing our super. I don't see this as being a real risk. And I definitely don't see this as being a real risk in the next 5-10 years, but it definitely is there. We've seen these rules change. So you need to be aware of it. And obviously, hopefully, if they do ever change these rules, it's for everyone's benefit. And of course, you may actually have, the realistic situation where you put more money into super, but it's still not necessarily enough to give you the life that you want. So you're not adequately prepared. And again, this is where a financial planner is going to help you so much. So there you have the pros and cons for putting more money towards savings and the potential mortgage versus putting more money to super. Now, what about that idea that I mentioned about doing a mix of the both? Again, this is not personal advice at all, but I'm just giving you food for thought, things to think about and consider so that when you see that financial planner, you know exactly what they're talking about and you can have a really productive, powerful conversation about what is right for you and you can get started. So having a blend of the two, where you'll perhaps have a regular savings plan in lieu of paying back your dad, but you also have maybe some additional salary sacrificing up to the maximum cap, which is per financial year, or even an after-tax contribution to super, doing the best of both worlds. This could potentially be a really nice flexible strategy for you. And even, small contributions into superannuation can be really powerful. Another idea, and this is what happens when you have a meeting with a financial planner, is you start sort of turning over all these stones that you may have not even considered before. What happens if you think, okay, well, I'm going to look at getting a pay rise, or I'm going to get a promotion, or I'm actually going to go and apply for a new job. So I'm probably going to look at maybe getting a bit of a pay rise, a change in my salary or a change in my package. This could be your opportunity where you go, you know what? I can now actually afford to do a bit more into super, or I can actually afford to put a bit more into those savings account to pay back my dad. These are the conversations that we need to start thinking about and having under the guidance of a licensed financial planner. Also, may discover that you're entitled to some other sort of special loopholes, like the catch-up contribution. Or you perhaps may qualify for something like the downsizer contribution, where you can put more money into superannuation when you approach retirement or you've retired and you decide, okay, you know what, I don't need a big house like this. I'm happy maybe in an apartment or a townhouse. I can afford to downsize, which is going to free up more money, wipe my mortgage out, and actually leave $100,000 or $200,000 that can go into super. You also may be actually entitled to the age pension. These are all things that I don't have access to because I obviously have limited information by what you've provided, but these are the conversations you need to be having and things that you need to be learning about and understanding and getting guidance from a financial planner. But what I would strongly recommend you do is get a clearer idea as to what you want. Ask yourself these questions. What would make you feel secure? What would make you feel financially safe? What would add financial harmony in your life? Think about what your value system is. Honoring your father, having a sense of stability in your life, being financially independent. Make sure that all the decisions you make and all the actions you take are in alignment to your values. Investing time to answer these questions is going to help you immensely. Now, I will point out I haven't obviously given you exact instructions as to what to do, because the truth is this is a really difficult decision. And the answer is that there is no one size fits all. Everyone is in a different situation with different values, different needs, different goals, different risks, different fears even. However, answering these questions, getting crystal clear about what you want, when do you want to retire, how much income do you need, how long do you need it to last, do you want to leave money in your estate, are there going to be lump sum withdrawals along the way? That's going to allow you to work out exactly how much money you need. Then we can work backwards from that. And I can't stress enough, you have got to go and see a financial planner. You've got to see them as soon as possible, because they are going to run some really detailed projections for you. You are going to see the gap, if there is even a gap, and actually brainstorm so many different ideas that will help you reduce that gap if it actually exists, or to actually pay back your father sooner, or to perhaps get more money into superannuation, or perhaps even maybe to start investing because you're actually going to be able to pay back your dad and you're going to be able to have enough money to super, and you're going to actually have that option should you choose to start investing. They're going to give you much more detailed projections, numbers, and of course they're going to give you a concrete strategy you can use to get started, and they will hold your hand all the way through and make those necessary tweaks and changes as your situation evolves. But promise me this, either way, you get started now by understanding what is most important to you and what will make you feel safe, secure, and financially independent. Investing in a financial plan is what you need to do right now. However, this information is going to make sure that you turn up to that financial planner's office ready to launch. All right, everyone, thank you so much for listening to today's episode. It's been an absolute honour to be able to answer this question for Amanda. Of course, a quick reminder, please leave me a rating and review. I would greatly appreciate it. And please feel free to send me your questions as to how to get started for Start Here. This is Sugar Mama's Fireplay. Ciao for now.